rewind to the start of 2025. That was the moment Washington decided to unleash what many economists grimly call a financial nuclear strike on Venezuela's oil sector. This wasn't some small embargo. It was a full-force attempt to crush the industry at its core. The opening blow came when the U.S. pulled Chevron's authorization to operate in the country, the last major American company still pumping oil there. Overnight, production of more than 100,000 barrels a day evaporated. But the real shockwave came on April 2nd, when the U.S. rolled out something the world had never seen before: secondary tariffs unlike anything in modern economic history. The message was blunt. Washington told every government on the planet, if you buy even 1 barrel of Venezuelan crude, we will slap a 25% tariff on everything you sell to us. Not just fuel, your TVs, your cars, your clothing, every last export. To grasp how extreme that is, remember that the typical US tariff hovers around 2%. Boosting it to 25% instantly turns a nation's exports into dead weight. The plan was cold, calculated, and brutally simple. Make buying Venezuelan oil so financially suicidal that no country would dare touch it, forcing Venezuela's exports toward zero. It was the fiercest display of American economic muscle in Latin America in a generation. U.S. officials assumed the logic was ironclad. No nation would gamble with access to a $20 trillion consumer market over a struggling state desperate for cash. But there was a fatal blind spot. The plan didn't consider the one actor big enough and already angry enough to ignore the threat: China. By 2025, Beijing and Washington were knee-deep in their own trade war. Chinese products had already been hit with layer upon layer of tariffs for years. To Beijing, yet another 25% levy felt less like a new punishment and more like one more bruise on an already battered relationship. They had built resilience into their economy long before this moment arrived. Even more important, China saw a golden opportunity beneath the chaos. With India, Europe, and nearly every other potential buyer too terrified to risk American retaliation, Venezuela's oil suddenly sat on the table, waiting for the one partner both bold enough and secure enough to reach for it. And China didn't merely step in as a customer. It became the customer. The U.S. expected sanctions to choke the market. Instead, they handed China a monopoly, an energy monopoly Beijing embraced with quiet satisfaction. With the competition swept aside by Washington's own hand, China didn't just increase imports. It announced its presence with force. In September 2025, while the world obsessed over tariff fallout, a Chinese firm named China Conquered began installing a massive new offshore drilling platform in Lake Maracaibo, the first large-scale project there in years. This wasn't a symbolic gesture, it was a billion-dollar anchor. The goal was to boost output from around 12,000 barrels a day to an eye-popping 60,000 by 2026. While Washington tried to suffocate Venezuela's oil fields, Beijing poured money, machinery, and manpower into resurrecting them, this time under its own banner. The message was unmistakable. China wasn't treating Venezuela as a temporary bargaining chip. It was embedding itself, physically, financially, and strategically, for decades. And this boldness didn't materialize overnight. It was the natural evolution of a partnership years in the making. In 2023, Venezuela became the first nation in Latin America to earn China's elite classification, an all-weather strategic partner. That title isn't diplomatic fluff. It's Beijing's highest badge of loyalty, reserved only for countries it is willing to back through crisis, political storms, and shifting global tides. It's a promise that the relationship won't collapse when pressure arrives. So, when the US detonated its tariff strategy in 2025, it wasn't striking a loose ally. It was hitting a fortified bond China had already strengthened. Beijing had essentially pre-committed to absorbing whatever shock the US could generate. But the deepest anchor tying Venezuela to China wasn't diplomacy or politics. It was debt, $60 billion worth. Over the years, China had loaned Caracas an enormous sum, but not through normal loans. Venezuela pays back this mountain of debt in barrels of oil. It operates like a tab at a bar that can only be paid with one specific drink. As long as the debt exists, Venezuela is obligated to ship oil to China, and China is legally entitled to accept it. Because this oil isn't being purchased on the open market, US sanctions can't scare it away. It's not optional commerce. It's repayment of a binding agreement. The US can protest all it wants, but stopping this flow would mean demanding Venezuela violate signed international contracts. That $60 billion tab is the steel chain guaranteeing China a steady supply of Venezuelan crude, no matter how loud Washington shouts. And here's the bitter twist for the United States. While Washington thought it was tightening the screws on Caracas, it accidentally delivered a blow straight to its own energy heartland. Along the Gulf Coast in Texas and Louisiana, enormous refineries built over decades with meticulous engineering were designed to process one very specific thing: thick, heavy crude. And the country that supplied the ideal version of that oil, almost like it was tailored for those refineries, was Venezuela. These facilities aren't flexible machines that can simply switch fuels on a whim. It's the industrial equivalent of forcing a diesel truck to run on gasoline. You can try, but the engine will choke. The result was immediate panic. American refineries scrambled to source replacement heavy oil, often resorting to pricier shipments from Canada or distant Middle Eastern producers. Retooling plants to process lighter crude wasn't just expensive, it was a logistical nightmare. So the sanctions didn't merely punish Caracas, they saddled American companies with massive new costs and exposed a painful blind spot in Washington's strategy. And when the dust settled, the numbers that came out in October 2025 painted a crystal clear picture. Yes, Venezuela's total exports did drop by about a quarter, but the core objective? That failed. Rather than collapsing, Venezuela's oil simply rerouted, flowing almost entirely into the arms of one buyer: China. The figures were staggering. China was now soaking up roughly 663,000 barrels of Venezuelan crude every single day, about 80% of everything Venezuela sold on the global market. Meanwhile, the United States, once a major customer, received only about 128,000 barrels daily, a shadow of its former role. This wasn't normal market behavior, it was near total domination. A dramatic reversal from just a few years earlier, and a hard, data-driven verdict. The strategy of isolation didn't neutralize Venezuela's oil sector, it simply handed it to Washington's biggest strategic rival. And Beijing wasn't done. Oil was just the first act. In November 2025, China unveiled another calculated move: a zero-tariff trade deal with Venezuela, covering 400 types of goods, from crops to manufactured products. This wasn't just an economic agreement, it was a binding embrace. By eliminating tariffs on such a wide range of items, China began weaving Venezuela into its own global supply web. It meant Venezuelan businesses could send products directly into Chinese markets, and Chinese companies could flood Venezuela with consumer goods, machinery, and technology. This arrangement didn't simply strengthen ties, it fused the two economies together. It created a long-term, interlocking system of economic dependence, far tougher to break than a single oil-for-money relationship. It was the final structural beam, locking Venezuela firmly into China's orbit. Step back and look at the full arc, and the picture becomes unmistakable. This was one of the most dramatic geopolitical miscalculations in recent US history. Washington deployed what it believed was its most devastating tool: financial isolation, expecting the Venezuelan government to crumble under the weight. But the strategy revealed a deeper flaw. It relied on an outdated assumption that the world still revolved around a single economic giant. It didn't acknowledge that the global landscape has changed, that multiple spheres of financial and political influence now exist. For decades, China has been building its own parallel ecosystem, its own lenders, trade networks, investment pipelines, and alliances capable of functioning without American approval. So when the sanctions hit, Venezuela didn't fall apart. It simply stepped fully into China's waiting embrace. The United States not only failed to achieve its intended outcome, it inadvertently delivered Beijing a strategic triumph. In doing so, Washington gave China access to coveted energy supplies and a strengthened foothold in a region the U.S. historically dominated, all at discount prices. It weakened its own leverage while highlighting the real limits of its power. This wasn't merely a lost oil deal, it was a clear sign that the world has entered a new phase. The era where one superpower could dictate outcomes unchallenged is fading. A multipolar order where influence is shared, contested, and constantly shifting has solidified. Venezuela's transformation shows what this new reality looks like. A nation under extreme pressure managed not only to survive but to secure a powerful protector because alternatives to American influence now exist. This reshapes the political map of the Western Hemisphere. China is no longer just a business partner to Latin American nations. It has become a financier, a diplomatic shield, and a builder of critical national infrastructure. This changes the rules entirely. It means that from now on, U.S. policy in its own neighborhood must account for China's potential countermoves. Every decision carries new risks, and the lesson is stark. In a world defined by interconnected power centers, coercive tactics can backfire spectacularly. Instead of weakening an adversary, they can strengthen a rival waiting just beyond the edge of the old world order. We've entered an age where every geopolitical action sends shockwaves, ripples that can reshape alliances, redirect economies, and transform the global balance of power.